We're going to be in Proverbs chapters 18 and 19 today. And before we get into Proverbs chapters 18 and 19, we're going to do a quick summary of everything that we've covered in the previous weeks. So we begin in Proverbs chapter 1. We're going to go through this real quickly, though. I'm trying to make these summaries a little shorter. So we start off with the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Verse 1 gives you the real short introduction, and then 1 to 7 gives you the longer introduction, where we see the purpose of Proverbs, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, and we also see kind of the audience as well that Proverbs is calling to give discretion to the youth, let the wise hear, and increase in learning. In chapter 9, we also see wisdom calling out to the simple and to everyone on the streets to heed her voice. And verse 7 gives us the motto of Proverbs in chapter 1. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. A little bit about the background of Proverbs is that we have a number of different authors, a couple editors. So Solomon wrote most of Proverbs, the vast majority of Proverbs, but there are a couple sections, especially at the end, such as in Proverbs chapter 30, verse 1, where we see the words of Augur, son of Jacob, the oracle. And then Proverbs chapter 31, verse 1, the words of King Lemuel. So those are the sections that Solomon did not have a strong hand in. And then we also have Proverbs chapter 25, verse 1. These also are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. So these are some of the different people that we see having a hand in the book of Proverbs. It's most likely that these men of Hezekiah in chapter 25 are the overall editors of Proverbs who transcribed Solomon's words, especially in chapters 25 and onward, along with putting in Augur's and King Lemuel's words into this whole collection. So if they are taken as the last editors of the book of Proverbs, then we have no reason not to think that. And even if we do a literary analysis, recent scholars especially have found out that a lot of this stuff dates back very old. We get a date at around 700 BC, which is around the time that King Hezekiah was running around, and he had the men of Hezekiah running around doing all this stuff. And you might be wondering, okay, why do we include it in the Bible, in Scripture, if we have people other than Solomon writing it? Well, simply put, Jesus affirmed the book of Proverbs by affirming the category of the writings, which Proverbs was an integral part of. Proverbs and the Psalms especially, were a huge part of that, along with other books of the Bible, but those were a couple of the main ones that were beyond any dispute. So because Jesus affirmed the category of the writings, you can go back to the previous Bible studies, especially the first and second studies, to hear more on that. So because Jesus affirmed Proverbs, we do too, and we should. And we get into a number of themes. Chapters 1 to 9 in Proverbs is the fatherly instruction section, where Solomon takes a fatherly role. There's a lot of, my son, heed my instruction. My son, do this. My son, do that. And that's a lot of what chapters 1 to 9 is about. It's longer discourses, so it's easier to see the kind of topics that Solomon is going for. So he goes through warnings. He goes through watching out for the adulteress and adultery. There's also wisdom calling out in the streets. So that begins in verse 20 of chapter 1, where wisdom is calling out in the streets. We also see longer chapters where wisdom is speaking, especially chapter 8. And we also see the sluggard and warnings against slothfulness. We see family discourses about listening to your mother and father and things like that. So that's chapters 1 to 9. Then we get into chapters 10 to 22 or 24, depending on how you want to divvy it up. But these are the short, pithy sayings. And this is usually what we consider and think of as Proverbs. So before chapters 1 to 9, we have longer discourses. And chapters 10 to 22, 24, we get very short, pithy sayings that are very hard to organize, but we have been organizing them and categorizing them as we've gone along. So we have been going through all of that. That's pretty much where I'll stop the summary. A couple of things to note, though, is that one of the main themes in chapters 10 to 22, 24 has been righteousness versus wickedness. What does the wicked person do? What does the righteous person do? What does wickedness look like? What does righteousness look like? And we're pretty much going to continue on with that theme, though things get a little different here and there, where, we might be talking about justice, which you could think of as kind of a subtopic, civil courts, public matters, things like that, but still talking about righteousness and wickedness. So that's still the main overall theme there. If you want to be called on to read specifically, you can go to the Bible Study React channel. I'll just remove the reactions on there right now. But go to the Bible Study React channel and react to that message if you want to be called on to read. There's one section that's pretty long, but you'll just be called on to read small little portions of the text. So as people are reacting to that, any questions on the summary so far?
Not here.
All right, nice. So it looks like B would like to volunteer for the first part.
So tempted to type in there, I want my free game. That's actually not my motive.
All right.
But if that was the thought on hand, I would be probably motivated to do it for that reason also. Knowing me and how I like free stuff. Sorry. I won't interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, that was a conversation in mod chat, so everyone's confused right now.
Yes. I think that you did a good job summarizing in very few words kind of what we've gone through, what we've looked at. And I appreciate that. It helps bring everyone up to speed. And it's good to affirm that the Word of God, meaning Scriptures, are inspired and profitable for all of them, profitable for teaching. So we're looking at Proverbs, and we're praying that the Holy Spirit would help us to receive and be taught, and that our lives would bear fruit for the glory of God. And in this case, we're learning a lot of wisdom, the fear of the Lord, and common sense in that context. So it's not really a question, it's more just a thought.
Yeah, well, thank you for the thought. We definitely need that wisdom from God to understand
Indeed.
His Word. All right, so let's get to the reading. B, could you please read verses 5 to 8 of chapter 18? And real quickly, we're not doing verses 1 to 4 because we covered that last week. It was part of a long section that gone into chapter 8. So just 5 to 8 of chapter 18.
From the CJB, it is not good to be partial to the guilty and thus deprive the innocent of justice. A fool's words get him into fights. Yes, his mouth calls out for a beating. A fool's mouth is his ruin. His words are a trap for him. Slanderers' words are tasty morsels. They slide right down into the belly.
Wonderful. So I haven't given you guys the structural diagram yet, which will tell you what kind of collection this is, but that's because I want you guys to figure out the first couple ones by yourselves. What kind of collection is this? Let me just, while you're thinking about that, let me bring out the screenshot for everyone who hasn't been here for the past couple studies. But take a look at that. What collection are we looking at there?
We're specifically looking at verses 4 to
5 to 8.
5 to 8. Okay, thank you.
Yep. And while you're thinking about that, for the new people who haven't been here for the collections and everything like that, I'll go ahead and explain them again. So I gave you guys a screenshot that has a numbered list to number 5. Just go through that list, starting at number 1. You have a parallel collection. This is a common one you see in Proverbs. It's grouped in an AB pattern. So the different letters stand for topics or certain words or phrases. So you could have topic A to begin with, and the next verse, or even the next line, might be in topic B. And then you have topic A, and then back to topic B. A chiastic collection reverses that order. So instead of AB and then repeated AB, you have AB and then it reverses that order, BA. So A, B, then BA. And you talk about those topics in that particular order. You have number 3, a catchword collection, which is a group of proverbs that's grouped by a similar, usually single word or sometimes phrase. And that's just how they're grouped. It's a catchword you see repeated in that group of proverbs. A thematic collection is where you have a certain theme. So it might not be a specific word or phrase, but you just have this kind of theme running through this group of proverbs, and you know then to kind of group it as one section. And then finally you have an inclusio collection, which means that you have the first part and the last part. Sometimes something anywhere in the first verse, anywhere in the last verse, which is the same word, phrase, or extreme explicit topic that's kind of bookending the whole section. So you have the certain phrase or word in the beginning, and that same phrase or word or topic at the end, and that tells you that everything in between is all part of the same section. So those are the collections, and now we're looking at what kind of collection is this particular Proverbs section, which is 5 to 8. And Matt says he thinks it's a collection. That's a good start. It is a collection. And B brings up perhaps it's number 4, a thematic collection. That's a possibility. We could be looking at a particular theme here in Proverbs. And Dogman suggests perhaps it's a parallel collection. Any other ideas?
It says there's a catchword collection, a group of proverbs that contain a common catchword. And I'll just kind of say my observations, but it says, to show partiality to the wicked is not good, nor to thrust aside the righteous in judgment. That doesn't actually say anything about this, but a fool's lips bring strife, and his mouth calls for blows. And then it starts talking about the mouth a lot. A fool's mouth is his ruin, and his lips are the snare of his soul. The words of a whisperer are like dainty morsels, and they go down into the innermost parts of the body. So verse 5 doesn't say anything about speaking, but the other 3 verses, 6, 7, and 8, talk about how the wicked speak and how they speak wickedness, how it leads to ruin. So I don't know what that would actually count as. I'm looking here.
Yeah, we certainly are getting a lot of options. And usually in a collection, you will find those other connections. There might be one particular collection that stands out really strongly, but you might see some other connections that might not be strong enough to say this is a catchword collection, but it might be a catchword collection. Either way, you guys are looking for connections, which is good. So
yes,
basically, what we're looking at here is actually a chiastic collection. So we start off in verse 5 with, it's not good to be partial to the guilty and thus deprive the innocent of justice. So that would be topic A in our chiasm. And then we get into verse 6. A fool's words gets him into fights. His mouth calls out for a beating. That would be topic B, because we're talking about something else. And we haven't gone through the last 2 verses, so it could be a parallel collection still, because we don't know the order. But verse 7 talks about a fool again and his words, so that's topic B. So right now our pattern is A, B, and B. Now, verse 8 is a little tricky. It's a little tricky because it's not explicitly talking about justice or anything like that, but we do see slander, we do see gossip, and generally you can have false witnesses, you can be partial to the guilty, you can deprive the innocent of justice through your slander, through your gossip, through false testimony, through false words, and things like that. So if we do think that the connection A-B-B is strong enough, then even though we're not explicitly talking about justice here, we can still make that connection and say that we're still talking about topic A in verse 8. So that would give us an A-B-B-A pattern. But we're not just talking about one chiasm here. We're actually talking about two chiasms. It's a chiasm inside of a chiasm. And the inner chiasm is in verses 6 to 7, where we see a fool's words in the first line of verse 6. That's topic A, so words. And then we see mouth in the second line, topic B. And then we go back to mouth again in the first line of verse 7. So that's B again, A, B, B, words, mouth, mouth. And then second line of verse 7, we have words again. So that gives us an A, B, B, A pattern. And your translation might say, yes, his lips call out for a beating. But it should be the same word there. And that gives us a chiasm inside of a chiasm, which is pretty intense. So yeah, hopefully you guys see that. And you can also make other connections there too. So we do see a similar word repeated throughout there. We kind of see a similar theme throughout there too. But even stronger than that is a chiastic pattern. Any questions on that?
So, just to clarify, we're reading from verse 5 to verse 8, or are we just reading verse 7 and stopping at verse 4? We read verse 8.
Verses 5 to 8.
All right, so we do include verse 8 in that. So, I don't know. I guess the part that threw me off was like verse 5 is like doesn't say anything about a mouth. I don't know. And then verses 6, 7, and 8 all talk about the words of a whisperer, like dainty morsels. That's in verse 8. So it kind of seemed, apart from verse 5, I would have considered it a theme, like a like it's all talking about speech, and particularly a fool's mouth, fool's lips, the words of a whisperer. It could be probably in the negative sense in the context, but so I think that's where it's a little like harder to spot it sometimes. The original grammar and the original, what's it called? Well, what did you call them? Sections?
Collections.
Collections. Thank you. Yes, it was coming out of my mouth as it was coming out of yours. Collections. And I have actually one question. So, are these collections were these intentional, or are these discovered? Like, when the people were writing it, is this the writing style they were writing it in with that knowledge, and we're learning that, kind of like learning an ancient language sort of thing? Where is it like we're categorizing as modern readers?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So as far as intentionality goes, I think it is definitely intentioned. You don't accidentally make a chiasm. That's something that you don't really accidentally do. And we see that pattern repeated throughout Proverbs. We see that pattern repeated throughout Hebrew wisdom literature, and also ancient Near Eastern literature as well. So not just Hebrew literature, but we also see it repeated in Hebrew poetry. We see it in the Psalms a lot. It was also a rhetorical device, writing a chiasm, and also a memory device too. When you have topics in a specific order, it helps you to memorize and remember what we're talking about. Kind of similar thing we do today is that, you make an acrostic of something that you memorize. It might be unicorn or something like that, and then you just have a word or phrase for each letter of the word unicorn, and it just helps you memorize it and remember it. That's what's going on here. It functions as a memory device. But yeah, it's definitely intentional. But we do have to be careful, because sometimes we could be, reading a pattern into the text that could certainly be there and could certainly be intended to be there and talking on the same topic and things like that. But it might not be a strong enough connection to group this up into a collection, if that makes sense. So for instance, if you look at verse 6, a fool's words gets him into fights, and you try to find some other place in a completely different chapter of Proverbs that also talks about a fool, and then say, these are all in a collection. Well, not really. They all talk about the same theme, and it's good to look at every instance that Proverbs talks about a fool to get a good broad understanding of what a fool is in Proverbs, but it's not a collection. A collection has a specific structure and close-knit pattern to it, such that I can say, okay, if we're talking about verse 5, it's not good to be partial to the guilty and deprive the innocent of justice. And one way that happens is that we're talking about slander. That is one way how you can be partial to the guilty, how the justice system can be partial to the guilty, deprive the innocent of justice. And we can group 6 and 7 very closely together because it's also a chiasm. And we'll get it more into that later on. Last couple weeks we did some interpretation of how these verses work in collections. So I'd recommend going to the last couple weeks, finding that one. We only did one collection where we really went into interpretation. But yeah, let's get to the next collection then. And this is one we're going to spend more time on because it is helpful to see the interpretations and things like that. So next person, let's see. I do have some reactions, which is good. Thank you guys for reacting. So I see Dogman on there. He's at the top of the list. So Dogman, could you please read verses 9 to 12 of chapter 18?
Where? Okay. Hello?
Hi, Dogman.
Hi.
What verses did you say?
9 to 12, chapter 18.
Okay, I'm reading from the NASB. He also who is slack in his work is brother to him who destroys. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous runs into it and is safe. A rich man's wealth is his strong city, and like a high wall in his own imagination. Before destruction, then heart of man is haughty, but humility goes before honor. He who gives an answer before he hears it is folly and shame to him. The spirit of a man can endure his sickness, but as for a broken spirit, who can bear it? The mind of the prudent acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. A man's
think you're
gift
going a
makes
little too far
room for
there.
him.
Just to verse 12.
Oh, I thought you said 18. Okay.
Oh, chapter
Sorry.
18, yeah.
Oh, right. Okay.
So yeah, that's the section, and it is a collection. What kind of collection is it? This one's a little easier. So Malky suggests perhaps it's a chiasm. Any other ideas?
I'm seeing a bit of a pattern with verse 9 and 12. That they both seem to have a similar theme. I'm trying to see, is this an inclusio connection? That's what I'm thinking about. I don't know. I mean, it could be the other.
I mean, it's possible. And when you look at chiastic patterns, it is easy to think that they might be an inclusio as well, because you have A, B, B, A, so the same thing in the first part, A, and then you have A again in the last part, and that's kind of going along with what an inclusio is. But if you can see a B, B, whereas in an inclusio you usually don't, then that would lean you towards a chiastic pattern. I mean, if you don't see BB, that would lean you to an inclusio.
Yeah, the weird thing is because verse 10 and 11 don't really connect. Sorry for the background noise. Verse 10 and 11 don't really connect because one talks about the name of the Lord is a strong tower, and then the other talks about it, a rich man's wealth is his strong city. But we know that that's not the same thing, obviously. Wealth is not the Lord's being a strong tower. It's wealth, so it's like, I don't know if we could really, kind of looks like A, B, B, A, sort of, in its theme. But again, you'd have to connect the Lord being a strong tower to, the rich man's strong tower is wealth. And that kind of seems like a parallel there. That doesn't really seem like a connection, theologically speaking. So, let me see, is this a parallel?
I'm glad you brought that up. And we see in verse 11, it's a high wall in his imagination, whereas verse 10 is, a lot stronger.
Yeah.
It's reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't believe I missed that. It does say that a rich man's wealth is his strong city, and a high wall is in his imagination. It's not actually security. That's a parallel there. Okay. I'm going to say this is like a parallel. What's the fancy word for that? Parallel chiasm? Parallel collection?
It's parallel
Parallel
or
collection.
parallelism.
Right.
That would give
like
you an
parallel
AB pattern, though.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's possible. So I can see where you guys are looking at it as perhaps a chiasm, because we start about destruction, verse 9. That's topic A. Then we go into security in verse 10, being safe, strong tower, secure. Verse 11, so that's topic B. And verse 11, well, we go again to some kind of theme of safety, so perhaps that's topic B again. And then at the end in verse 12, we have destruction, which seems to be talking about topic A again, which was the same theme in verse 9. There are a couple difficulties. One difficulty is what Matt brought up in verse 11. Is this really actual security and safety as far as a rich man's wealth go? Is that real security that could be likened to the kind of strong tower that the Lord's name is? So that's the question there. It is also possible in a chiasm where you have not B as one. So you have B and then you have not B. Or you could say B prime. If you're into poetry, you could say B prime, where it kind of opposes the first B, but it's still on the same topic, just kind of opposite a little bit. So that is a possibility still. The main difficulty comes in verse 12, where we have topic A in the first part before destruction, topic A. A man's heart is haughty. But then we have different topic. This is not destruction. Humility comes before honor. So that's not topic A. So that's the difficulty with a chiastic pattern. So yeah, I would recommend asking that question in Ask Christians. But yeah, starting with the book of John is good. And then you can have other recommendations in the Ask Christians channel. So Malchior says perhaps it's a catchword collection. So that's another possibility. I would say that it resembles closely and closest to a thematic collection in all the parts. So it's not a very strong chiasm because of verse 12 kind of splits off into two different topics. And verse 11 is kind of iffy there in a chiasm, but I would say just thematic. And the theme would be security. So verse 9, the slack person, he's brother to destruction, he's not secure. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. That's the security. And that would seem that that is the high point of that whole collection, because we're talking about the name of the Lord against all these other things, such as being slack or being lazy and being brother to him who destroys. And verse 11 talks about security as well, but in a different way than in verse 10. A rich man's wealth is his strong city. It's like a high wall in his imagination. So it's not really secure. It's not the name of the Lord. In verse 12, we also talk about security again. You can get destroyed when your heart is haughty, when you're prideful, when you're not paying attention to things, you're getting a little lax maybe, you're getting arrogant in things, you're not adequately preparing or depending on the Lord, and you can be destroyed that way. And humility comes before honor. So in order to depend on someone else, like the Lord, in order to run into that strong tower, you got to have some humility. So I would say that it's thematic, but I can see some other connections there. They might not be as strong as the thematic collection, but I can see some other themes there that you guys mentioned. All right, now I'm actually going to give you guys the diagram, which has the different collections on it, because we got to keep on going, and we don't have too much time. But any thoughts on verses 9 to 12? Actually, specifically, any application for that? How do you apply that to your lives?
Meaning this verse we're reading?
Yeah, 9 to 12.
Yeah. 9 to 12. Well, verse 9 talks about whoever is slack in his work is a brother to him who destroys. So, some would say, well, I'm not hurting anybody by being apathetic, lazy, or, whatever. But the truth is, it's in this context, it's a form of destruction because, if a man doesn't work, his kids and his wife won't eat. So it does lead to destruction in the immediate sense. And in verse 10, it talks about how the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous man runs into it and is safe. And we know that the Lord is our refuge and our strength. And we know that we should not put our trust in riches or wealth or physical things. Our trust is in the Lord. And then it's revealed there in verse 11 about how a rich man's wealth is his strong city. A rich man often relies on his wealth and loves his wealth, but it's only in his imagination that it's a sense of actual security. And in verse 12, it talks about before destruction, a man's heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor. And I think that that's a kind of reverse echo, in a sense, of what James and Peter say when they say, humble yourselves before the Lord. He gives grace to the humble. So, and he will exalt you in due time, that verse. So yeah, those are my thoughts on it. As far as application go, I think it's important for us. Sorry, background noise. It's important for us to be diligent, to trust in the Lord and have the name of the Lord, to put our trust in who God is, to put our trust that He is, they're just being as noisy as I can, I guess, to put our trust in who He is and to find refuge in the Lord, rest and refuge, and to not trust in our riches or our wealth, and to not be dismayed by poverty, but to rejoice in every circumstance, trusting in the Lord, and to have a heart that is humble before the Lord, because humility comes before honor. So the Lord will exalt us in the way in which He chooses, if we do justly love mercy and walk humbly with Him. And I believe that by God's grace, that is something we're called to do as Christians. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I like that. I think you exposited that pretty well and gave us some really good application too. And you connected it all together, which is really good. And that is the real benefit to a collection, where you know that the intention is that this is supposed to be one section, that it all builds on itself and on all the different parts, kind of builds together. You did well in that. All right.
I'd like to say something.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Verse 10 also applies to what it says in the New Testament, where it says, whoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. So we see that's why he's saying that the name of Jehovah is a Migdal Uz, a strong tower, and the righteous run to it and they're safe. There's also a town in Israel called Migdal Uz, which means strong tower.
Yeah, like the connection to the New Testament, we also see that, very similar language in the New Testament. Good stuff. All right, you guys now have the diagram. If you scroll up a little bit, you'll see this long block of text that's very small. You'll probably have to download it and zoom in to it. Just open the original. You got to zoom in. That's the thing. So if you do zoom in quite a bit, you'll see that I have a number of lines on the right-hand side and a little circle, little bubble with a word in there. And that word might be chiastic or a chiasm, or it might be thematic and things like that. So that's how they're grouped up into these collections. So the next collection we have is verses 13 to 14. So let me grab the next person to read. And the next person to read is Hat. So Hat, could you please read verses 13 and 14 of chapter 18?
Well, that's too many verses. Okay. I'm kidding, of course. 13 and 14?
Yeah.
The one who gives an answer before he listens. Ouch. This is foolishness and disgrace for him. A man's spirit can endure sickness, but who could survive a broken spirit?
Wonderful. So, what's the connection here? Out of the 5 collections, what brings these 2 verses together?
I don't have my Bible in front of me. What are the 2 verses? I'll post them.
Verses 13 to 14, chapter 18.
Thank you. 13 to 14. So you're saying these are connected?
They could be.
With my small English brain, first glance, I wouldn't think of them as being necessarily connected, because he who gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame to him. And then the next verse talks about the spirit of a man can endure his sickness, but as for a broken spirit, who can bear it? Seems like 2 separate topics, and they don't really, from my small American brain, don't really seem to have much of a connection. I'm thinking though. Shame. Yeah, I don't really see the connection, but maybe there's something I'm not seeing.
No, you can just stop
Maybe
right there, because there actually is no connection. It was a trick question.
Smart Mark.
I just wanted to...
Getting us to think.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring that up, because sometimes people do get a little hasty when they look for connections, and they try to force things together that weren't intended to really go together. But yeah, there's just no connection there. Just 2 individual proverbs, as I've labeled it on the diagram. Were you going to say something, Epic?
Epic, you got your mic on.
All right. I'll assume that you just maybe you didn't have anything to say, or it was already said. So that could have been it. So yeah, I just don't think there's any connection here. Our commentary doesn't see any connection here either. So we do have to be careful in making connections that just aren't there. That was just a little trick question lesson. But yeah, like Hat said when she saw that first verse, though, if anyone gives an answer before he hears, it's his folly and shame. I think that's a good lesson for all of us. Just to be good listeners, be careful when we talk. Alright, let's get to the next collection. But before that, I just want to point out another thing. That sometimes you will have 2 seemingly unrelated proverbs, but they might be part of a very strong connection, strong collection, I should say. We have a very strong chiastic pattern, or very strong inclusio, telling you that you are looking at a collection. And in that case, you can make some connections there, even if they might not seem like you can. But if they're in the context of a good, genuine collection, then you should, because that's the way it was meant to be read. But in the case of 13 and 14, there's no overarching collection they're a part of that would kind of group these together in any way, or tell you that we're talking about a couple different topics but towards a similar theme. There's nothing like that in these 2 verses. Anyway, next collection. This one's actually a real collection, so no more tricks. So Matt, could you please read verses 15 to 19?
Yes, I can. Do you want to post it for me, or shall I?
Yeah, let me see.
Proverbs. Yes. Very
There
good.
it is.
You're faster. Okay. An intelligent heart. Oh, can you all hear me good?
I can.
Okay. An intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. A man's gift makes room for him and brings him before the great. The one who states his case first seems right, until the other comes and examines him. The lot puts an end to quarrels and decides between powerful contenders. A brother offended is more unyielding than a strong city, and quarreling is like the bars of a castle.
Alright, so I've labeled this as a thematic collection in the diagram. Why do you guys think it's thematic, or why do you disagree and think it might be something else?
It speaks about a lot of conflict.
Yeah, definitely. Conflict. And there's also a lot of public matters, kind of civil matters. So we're talking about the great in verse 16 and man's gift. Verse 17, we're talking about like maybe a civil case. First guy, he seems to be right till the other one comes to examine him. And that's something I've heard from moderators in debates today, where they kind of caution the audience and say, you got to listen to both sides. And the first guy, he might sound really right, and the other guy comes along and then, oh, maybe that guy sounds kind of right. And verse 18, we have more about quarreling, or at least putting an end to quarrels as well. The lot, two powerful contenders. And then you have a brother who's been offended, more unyielding than a strong city, and quarreling some more. But what about verse 15? Where does verse 15 fit in all of that, if at all?
I mean, it could fit in the sense, yeah, exactly. The goal. It could be kind of like a introduction, I guess. I don't know, to the things he's saying about, I don't know. Someone was going to talk. My brain stopped. Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, I was just gonna, sorry. I was thinking maybe like the one that's gonna judge the case. That's knowledge and listens and has discernment.
Yeah, I would think both of you are on track there. And I like what you said, Matt, that perhaps it introduces this collection. That's exactly what our commentary says. This first verse introduces this whole collection, kind of frames it all in the theme of being wise. So you're not just avoiding quarrels just to avoid quarrels. You're avoiding quarrels because you are seeking to be wise, seeking to acquire knowledge about all the things going on here. So I would agree with that. And Amanda says, perhaps a judge is what we're talking about. And yeah, we can see the other verses that they kind of put up this ideal character who's maybe mediating these offenses, these quarrelings, and avoiding them. And that is one of the things that a judge would be doing. So yeah, it could be getting at that as well. It is a difficult one, though, because verse 15, we have to kind of take another step further to put that in there. Thematic collections are usually not as strong as a chiastic collection, especially if you have a verse like verse 15. They're not as strong as those other collections. And it's especially difficult because verses 13 and 14, the ones we read earlier, they aren't in any specific collection either. But it would be a lot easier if you had verses 13 and 14, a strong specific collection, and maybe verse 20 and on would be another collection. And then you have verses 15 and 19, which is what we're talking about now, kind of sandwiched in there as its own collection. But we don't have that because verses 13 and 14 are just kind of off on their own, doing their own thing. So it is a little difficult, but I think we can say that verse 15 does introduce the theme of verses 16 to 19, which get a little more specific into what wisdom looks like and what it looks like to seek knowledge. So yeah, good stuff there. All right, next collection is verses 20 to 21. We're going to go through the next couple ones pretty quick. So, Dogman, could you read verses 20 and 21?
Sure. Let me do this from the diagram. A person's belly will be filled with the fruit of his mouth. With what his lips produce, he will be filled. The tongue has power over life and death. Those who indulge in it must eat its fruit.
All right. So I've labeled it as thematic and catchword. Why do you guys think that is? Or perhaps you could bring up a different collection.
Mouth, tongue, lips,
Yeah, exactly.
reading.
You also have fruits and, the yield or product of the lips. Any other ideas?
Sorry, I was voice chatting, so which verse are we on now? I mean, not voice chatting, texting.
We're on
Or hi, in
verses
general.
20 and 21. looking at
Okay,
what
so-
kind of collection this is. Well, specifically why.
Oh, yeah, these are definitely connected. Definitely.
Hmm.
With the fruit of the man's mouth, his stomach will be satisfied. He will be satisfied with the product of his lips. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat the fruit. It's a seamless, like, two-part one proverb, if you think about it. It's like, I don't know, what is that? Would that be like a theme collection? Themed collection?
Yeah, I'd say it's
Because
thematic.
yes, Oh, that's what you meant by thematic. Okay, I think of thematic as like movie for some reason. I didn't pick
Cinematic.
up on the right one. Yeah, I don't know why thematic. Yeah, but yeah, theme. That's definitely my answer.
Yeah, and we do have a theme there. Like Amanda said, we're talking about fruit, we're talking about yield, produce, and the product. In both of those verses, we're talking about words, and mouth, and lips, and so on and so forth. And it's also a catchword collection. And the catchword that's repeated in both of those verses is the word fruit. And that is the same Hebrew word going on through those verses. If you look at mouth and tongue and lips, those are different words. It's enough to say that we're talking about a theme, even those are different words between those two verses, but the common verse between those verses is fruit, in the Hebrew at least. That's the common word we're looking at, which makes it a catchword collection in addition to thematic. Any questions on that?
No, I think the gears in the old brain are starting to move. I'm getting more and more of this as we're going through it, because it's like looking for it can be hard, but when you see it, you see it. You're like, oh, this is thematic collection. This is theme. This was intended to be read together, not cut apart and dissected like a frog. This is a part of the same proverb here, even though they're two separate technically, but they're not really. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I'd also recommend comparing these two verses to verses 13 and 14, where, Matt was looking at it and he's like, I don't see any connection here. So yeah, if you just scroll up, you'll see where we posted 13 and 14. But just compare those and you'll see that I don't see any connection in verses 13 to 14, but I do see one in 20 to 21. All right, we're going to get into the last collection, and you'll notice that I just have this huge section in the diagram. So the huge section starts in verse 22 and ends all the way in verse 4 of chapter 20. So it includes all of chapter 19 and then extends kind of outside of those boundaries, which is why I do recommend ignoring the chapter breaks in the book of Proverbs. They're not that good. They could be better. The verse markings, though, are usually, most of the time, from what I've seen, the verse markings are great in the book of Proverbs, but the chapter breaks could be better. So anyway, that's starting at verse 22 of chapter 18, all the way to chapter 20, verse 4, and I see that Draco has volunteered. So Draco, could you read that entire section?
From what verse to what verse? From 22 all the way down to 4?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
4 of chapter 20. So
Or
all of
yes.
19. Okay.
All right. Here we go. He who finds a wife finds a great good. He has won the favor of Adonia. The poor man speaks beseechingly. The rich man's answer is blunt. Some friends pretend to be friends, but a true friend sticks closer than a brother. Better to be poor and live one's life uprightly than engage in crooked speech, for such a one is a fool. To act without knowing how you function is not good, and if you rush ahead, you will miss your goal. A person's own folly is what ruins his way, but he rages in his heart against Adonia. Wealth brings in many friends, but the poor man loses the one friend he has. A false witness will not go unpunished. Whoever breathes out lies will not escape. Many ask favors of a generous person. To a giver of gifts, everyone is a friend. A poor man's relatives all hate him. Even more, his friends stay away from him. He may pursue them with entreaties, but they aren't there to be found. To acquire good sense is to love oneself. To treasure discernment is to prosper. A false witness will not go unpunished. Whoever breathes out lies. Okay. A false witness will not go unpunished. Whoever breathes out lies will perish. It isn't fitting for a fool to live in luxury, and even less for a slave to govern princes. People with good sense are slow to anger, and it is their glory to overlook an offense. A king's wrath is like a roaring lion, like the roaring of a lion, but his favor is like the dew on the grass. A son who is a fool in his father's ruins. Oh, a son who is a fool is his father's ruin, and a nagging wife is like a leak that keeps dripping. A house and wealth are inherited from ancestors, but a sensible wife is from Adonia. Laziness makes people fall asleep, and an idle person will go hungry. He who keeps a mitzvah keeps himself safe, but he who doesn't care how he lives will die. He who is kind to the poor is lending to Adonia, and he will repay him for his good deed. Discipline your child while there is hope, but don't get so angry that you kill him. A violent-tempered person will be punished. If you try to save him from it, you will make things worse. Listen to advice and accept discipline, so that in the end you will be wise. One can devise many plans in one mind, but Adonia's plan will prevail. A man's lust is his shame, and a poor man is better than a liar. The fear of Adonia leads to life. One who is satisfied and rests untouched by evil. The lazy person buries his hand in the dish, but does not bother to bring it to his mouth. If you strike a scorner, the simple will learn to act wisely. If you reprove the intelligent, he will understand what you mean. One who mistreats his father and evicts his mother is a son who brings him shame and disgrace. My son, if you stop heeding discipline, you will stray from the principles of knowledge. A worthless witness mocks at justice, and the mouth of the wicked swallows wrongdoing. Judgments are in store for scorners, and blows for the backs of fools. Wine is a mocker, strong liquor a rowdy. Anyone led astray by it is unwise. The dread of a king is like when a lion roars. He who makes him angry commits a life-threatening sin. Avoiding quarrels brings a person honor, for any fool can explode in anger. A lazy person won't plow in winter, so at harvest time, when he looks, there is nothing.
All right, thanks for reading that gigantic section. Yeah.
Good.
You
All
can.
good.
A mitzvah is just a command, and some of the words are a little confusing in the CJB. And usually you could just say Adonai, but you can just pronounce it however you like. That's fine.
Oh, Adonai. Okay. Yeah, that sounds better.
Yeah, it's all right. But yeah, thanks for reading. Especially that was a long
No
section. So as we were reading through, hopefully you guys were trying to look for connections. It's an extremely difficult section to do so with, though. But I do have it labeled as thematic. You'll see a number of themes in that section. I also noted it as random repetition, where you'll see one theme in one section, then you'll have a different theme over here, and then you'll have that same theme coming back again, but without any real, discernible, strong pattern there. He just kind of repeats it here and there. And we mentioned, I think last week or a couple weeks ago, why there's random repetition in Proverbs, and it's not like, here are all the verses on fools in one section, and here are all the verses on kings in this section. He actually intersplices those themes throughout the book of Proverbs. And that just helps us with remembering it. It gives variety and kind of a poetic flair to things, so it's not just a boring list that just goes on, here's one topic, here's the second topic. It just repeats things throughout so that you can also be reminded of certain topics. Because by the time you finish the first couple chapters of Proverbs and get to the end, you could easily forget what you've been talking about. So having topics repeated throughout Proverbs helps you remember things, helps build on things some more, gives some good variety in there too. So Draco brings up a connection there. 5 and 9, false witness here will not go unpunished. False witness there will not go unpunished. Yeah, that's really good that you brought that up, because that's one of the inclusios in this section. And there are a number of different inclusios in this whole section. Let me see if I can... There's just too many connections that we could bring up. So I'll just... And we just don't have time. So I'll just bring you guys the shorthand version. So I'm sending you the screenshot of how our commentary kind of lays this out. So you have two main sections. You have section A and you have section B. So section B, you have a number of little subtopics. You have a good wife, starting it off, verse 18, 22. And you have the poor. And you also have patience and royal anger. You have a bad family and / a good wife, which kind of bookends that whole section as section A. But then you also have section B in 19:15 to 24. So we talk about laziness in section B, personal discipline as opposed to that. You go back to laziness again. Then you have the mocker, who's also a bad egg. He's a bad apple. And you have, in addition to laziness and mocking, you have royal anger, patience, and you have laziness again in 24, which tells you that it kind of bookends this section as well. Laziness in the beginning, laziness at the end. Just like in section A, we had a good wife here, and then at the end of section A, you had a good wife again. Yeah, you guys are both right there. Adonai just means Lord. Could also mean, well, especially in the New Testament Greek, kurios, you could just be talking about Sir. Just S-I-R as a formal name. But when it does refer to God and Jesus Christ, it does mean Lord, capital L. Mocking is bad. Yeah, mocking is bad, especially in the context of that passage. So any questions on that section? I know it was a big section and that we kind of ran through it very quickly just because we don't have too much time. But you guys have the outline if you want to kind of look into it further.
I think it's harder, to spot the big ones. Like you have to start small, make little connections, and then you can make bigger connections. Like section A has good wife, then the poor, patience, royal anger. Like you're not, like I don't know how you would actually, in my own studies, how I would find that connection other than just doing a bigger scale of what we've been learning. Like it would take some practice to find that connection in it, as a big collection here.
Yeah, it is very tough, especially the bigger ones, like you mentioned, because they're all part of these little small ones, and you might be wondering what on earth is happening, but you haven't zoomed out far enough, so to speak, to see the whole collection. But you might be wondering why Section A and Section B are put together under one collection if we're talking about a wife, poor, family in Section A, and then Section B seems to talk about something else. We're talking about the lazy people, we're talking about royal anger and patience. One of the reasons for that, the main reason, is that we see connections between Sections A and B. So for instance, we look at, let me just paste the commentary there. So 1917 on kindness to the poor, and 1917 is part of collection, or section B, I should say, appears to be a response to 1823 to 1910, which is part of section A. So that is one, just one. There's a lot of other ones. But that's just one connection between these two sections. And that's why we're kind of grouping this all under one gigantic collection that Draco Right. So, any final thoughts or questions on anything that we covered in our study today?
Oh, I didn't realize I had my mic on this whole time. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's
So,
fine.
what was I interrupting? Was there noise?
No, I didn't hear any noise.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have any questions. I think we've learned a lot.
Yeah, and just to kind of bank off what you mentioned earlier about how we would study this on our own, it would be very difficult. This is the kind of thing that you would get from a passage after reading it like 50 times and looking specifically for these kinds of collections and connections. So it would take a lot of study to figure these things out. But it's worth it, definitely.
Definitely worth it. Yeah.
All right, I think we can go ahead and close it out. And Dogman, we've come back to you again. Could you please close us out with a word of prayer?
Okay. We love you. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for the world you give us and the food you give us and the day that we have. Thank you for this chance to get together and study your word together. Your words are amazing and inerrant and infallible. They have a life. Help us to apply what we learned throughout our lives, throughout the week, and help us be open to whatever else you want us to learn. In Jesus' name I pray.
Amen.